Hello, welcome back, and today we're going to be starting off with our Bible verse about stewardship, the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25. It's a bit of a longer read, so we're going to just jump right in. For context, Jesus is speaking about the kingdom in this message. For it is just like a man about to go on a journey. He called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, depending on each one's ability. Then he went on a journey. Immediately the man who had received 5 talents went, put them to work, and earned 5 more. In the same way, the man who earned 2 earned 2 more. But the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 talents approached, presented 5 more talents, and said, "Master, you gave me 5 talents. See, I've earned 5 more talents." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share in your master's joy." The man with 2 talents also approached, and he said, "Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I've earned 2 more talents." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share in your master's joy." The man who had received 1 talent also approached and said, "Master, I know you. You're a harsh man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. So I was afraid and went off and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours." His master replied to him, "You evil, lazy servant. If you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and I would have received my money back with interest when I returned. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. And throw this good-for-nothing servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." This parable that Jesus preaches is about stewardship and service for the kingdom of God. The master in this example is Jesus himself, and we are the servants. There are quite a few implications that we could draw about this parable, the first being that as Christians, there is an expectation of us, a duty to which we are called to. Because of this commitment, the servants in this verse all have their belongings and possessions under the roof of the master. This means that our provision from God is to be put to do good work for the master. As we are born into this world, we arrive with nothing, and when we leave, we will lose the earthly portion. But the reward is more than the accumulation of wealth for the sake of the servant, but for the master. This gives the servant a purpose in what they do. We should discuss the value of the talent itself and its measurement of worth. A single talent is worth 6,000 denarii, which a single denarii is valued at a single day's wage. In other words, a talent is quite a bit of money. This is representative of the Lord's blessing and how abundant his grace is. Now, the 3 servants got 3 different amounts of talents. The first observation that I want to make is that even the believer who is receiving 1 talent is receiving a significant blessing, something that would seem silly to hide in the ground and do nothing with. Now, some may point out the differences in the blessing and draw the conclusion that this is an unfair and unjust operation. As the last servant says, "Master, I know you, and you are a harsh man." This is where the difference between the world's understanding of wealth clashes with the understanding of the kingdom of God. This is a difference in ability, not of merit, equality, or equity. This is how the world organizes itself, but not the kingdom of God. Because the blessing is given in proportion to ability, this is for the benefit of the kingdom of God. In fact, those who do more are entrusted with more, and all faithful stewards share in the joy of the master. We are all on the same team. The servant doesn't demand its portion from the master. There is no equality in that if everyone has different abilities and opportunities. What's equal is our fidelity to the will of the master, as we all have a duty and a purpose. There were 2 whom were faithful in their service and managed to double what they were given. The servants are rewarded for their faithfulness and their diligence. They were faithful, and they were put in charge of more. We do not know when the master will return, but when he does, the good servant will be eager to show the master what he has done. This is contrasted by the last servant who was slothful. I think we often make the mistake of saying that we place ourselves in a value neutral position, which if we aren't actively doing evil, then we are fine. Sloth reveals this as a lie, as sloth rots our expectations and erodes our sense of duty. What develops from all this is a dual outcome, one being slothful and the other faithful. But how do we avoid the slothful path and find ourselves becoming faithful stewards? For this, I want to bring in Dave Ramsey's book, The Total Money Makeover, and we're going to show stewardship in a more pragmatic manner. Now, I'm not going to give a full review of this book, or go through the 7 baby steps, or go through the nuts and bolts of his plan. I have a little bit more to say about the book at the end of this devotional, but for now, I want to quote something that he frequently says on his radio show and on page 3 of this book. Being good with money is 80% behavior and 20% head knowledge. What to do isn't the problem, doing it is. Most of us know what to do, but we just don't do it. The behavior around how we handle money is our mindset about money. And to handle money properly is to have the correct mindset when we are armed with the correct knowledge in how to handle it. Many of us might not know what to do with money, but most of us already know what we shouldn't be doing with money. Now, out of Total Money Makeover, there are 2 strategies overall which lead to financial peace, which are decreasing debt and increasing investing. We're going to begin with debt, starting from a reading from Proverbs. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Dave will frequently quote this, but I want to explore this idea a bit as well. We remember from our previous weeks that we cannot serve 2 masters, that the love of money is the root of all evil, and we also remember that the world has its own system and money belongs to it. When we read that the rich rule over the poor, it is not the intention of the kingdom mindset, but rather this is the reality of the world. This isn't about the moral implications of being rich or poor. This is just a hierarchical reality. What follows this is that the borrower is slave to the lender. This is a means of entrapment that we would do well to avoid, but yet again, we must read this in such a way that is consistent with what came before. Having debt doesn't have moral implications of its own. It is the reality of the world and its workings. Yet borrowing for debt leads to possible worry, loss of freedom, not fully trusting in his provision, causing tension in our relationships, and when it's used unnecessarily and frivolously, it can be used for evil. In summary, debt in and of itself isn't evil, but it should be avoided. Many Christians would rightfully point to our society today and claim that how most people are using debt is sinful, as they are ignoring God's will and using debt to acquire more things and having a materialistic mindset. I would very much agree with this. However, I don't want to mislead people. Having debt is not a surefire indicator that someone is not a faithful steward, nor should it be. God, at the end of the day, will be the judge. People and priests alike, servant and master, female servant and mistress, buyer and seller, lender and borrower, creditor and debtor. The earth will be stripped completely bare and will be totally plundered, for the Lord has spoken this message. Going back to the parable we read earlier, the person who buried their talent wasn't thrown out into the outer darkness because they gave away their talent or lent their talent. They were thrown out and stripped of their talent because they were not diligent or intentional. It's an issue of stewardship. When framed in this way, this means that the concept of debt goes far beyond money. We remember the Lord's Prayer, how we ask God to forgive our debts, meaning sins, and forgive the debts of others. We also think about how we spend our time. If we are investing our time into screen time, that's a form of debt on our time. I don't want to take it too far, because clearly how we use the word can mean all sorts of different things. But what I'm trying to get at is, with a mindset of diligence, we can avoid what God doesn't want for us, and we can be in a better place to discern what He does want for us. Before we move on from debt, I would like to read one more verse, more or less about the mindset of diligence. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, or entered into an agreement with a stranger, you have been snared by the words of your mouth, trapped by the words of your mouth. Do this, then, my son, and free yourself, for you have put yourself in your neighbor's power. Go, humble yourself, and plead with your neighbor. Don't give sleep to your eyes, or slumber with your eyelids. Escape like a gazelle from a hunter, like a bird from a hunter's trap. Many of you who are familiar with Dave's work will recognize this as gazelle intensity. In other words, We must be diligent in order to free ourselves from the complication that comes from debt. When we use this approach, our entire mindset changes. We're going to talk more about this mindset next week when we put this all together. But for now, what we should understand is that there's a level of intention and urgency when we find ourselves ensnared. More specifically, this is the remedy for sloth. If we have found ourselves similar to the lazy servant, then we must return to that gazelle intensity to ensure safety from the trap of debt. While biblical views on debt aren't often varied, I have heard many different biblical beliefs on investing and wealth building. And to be honest, while we're looking at the Bible, there isn't a whole lot of information about investing itself. We have the reading from the last time, do not store treasures up on earth, and some Christians take this to mean that we shouldn't invest. Others look to the last chapter of Proverbs about the godly wife as proof that we can and should invest. She sees that her profits are good, and her lamp never goes out at night. Others yet might point to the Bible reading we started with and say that investing is a core component to being a diligent steward. And there's also these two verses in Proverbs 21. Whoever loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and olive oil will never be rich. Precious treasure and oil are in the dwelling of a wise person, but a fool consumes them. The one who pursues righteousness and faithful love will find life, righteousness, and honor. Reading these two verses in the same chapter is what makes this study so much fun. And that's why it takes a great deal of discernment to be able to understand what we should do. With all of that in mind, I'm going to return to this next week, where we're going to finish our discussion on investing. I know I'm leaving this discussion on a bit of a cliffhanger, which is something I don't normally do. But I want to be able to flesh out this properly without rushing through it. And I also think that this is a great way to challenge ourselves in thinking what it means to be a diligent steward. Just as the faithful servants were wise with their provision, in what way are we able to do the same with our own provision? Before I go, I did say that I would offer my brief thoughts on the Total Money Makeover and the program itself overall. I personally believe that the program really does work and generally has the guardrails in place to prevent people to fall into trouble and making bad decisions on debt if the program is followed. Which, if you listen to the radio program, some people really have a difficult time actually following the steps. This is a bit of foreshadowing for next week, but without the biblical understanding of money and without the proper guardrails of faith, it is possible near the end of this program to take his practical advice and apply it to the love of money rather than stewardship. It really comes down to a question of the heart. It is of my personal opinion that this gets investing correct insofar as not attempting risky assets or trying to get rich quick. In other words, this program isn't doing things that would be outside the realm of biblical wisdom. All of that out of the way, Dave Ramsey's book and his show are fantastic resources on how to handle money from a practical and biblical perspective. It is not a program that favors maximization. It favors a common sense approach that is secure while having the proper guardrails so that people are able to get out of debt, so that they can live and give like no one else. For full disclosure, I listen to his podcast occasionally, as well as the Money Guy Show, who are fellow Christians as well. Both I would recommend for those who would want to know more about money from a practical perspective. So until next time, God bless and stay salty.